This is part 33 in the series for the reading of the Foreign and Military Intelligence document. The reading will resume on page 394. Although the CIA recognized these effects of LSD to unwitting individuals within the United States, the project continued. Footnote 24. Pausing the reading to read footnote 24. Even during the discussions which led to the termination of the unwitting testing, the DDP turned down the option of halting such tests within the US, and continuing them abroad despite the fact that the Technical Services Division had conducted numerous operations abroad making use of LSD. The DDP made this decision on the basis of security, noting that the past efforts overseas had resulted in, quote, making an inordinate number of foreign nationals witting of our role in the very sensitive activity. End quote. Memorandum for the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence from the Deputy Director for Plans, December 17, 63, page 2. Resuming the reading. As the Deputy Director for Plans, Richard Helms, wrote the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence during discussions which led to the cessation of unwitting testing. While I share your uneasiness and distaste for any program which tends to intrude upon an individual's private and legal prerogatives, I believe it is necessary that the agency maintain a central role in this activity, keep current on enemy capabilities, the manipulation of human behavior, and maintain an offensive capability. Footnote 25. Pausing the reading to read footnote 25. I.B.I.D pages 2 to 3. Resuming the reading. There were no attempts to secure approval for the most controversial aspects of these programs from the executive branch or Congress. The nature and extent of the programs were closely held secrets. Even DCI McCone was not briefed on all the details of the program involving the surreptitious administration of LSD until 1963. It was deemed imperative that these programs be concealed from the American people. As the CIA's Inspector General wrote in 1957, precautions must be taken not only to protect operations from exposure to enemy forces but also to conceal these activities from the American public in general. The knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical and illicit activities would have serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles and would be detrimental to the accomplishment of its mission. Footnote 26. Pausing the reading to read footnote 26. IG. Survey of TSD, 1957, page 217. Resuming the reading. Subsection 2. The death of Dr. Frank Olson. The most tragic result of the testing of LSD by the CIA was the death of Dr. Frank Olson, a civilian employee of the Army, who died on November 27, 1953. His death followed his participation in a CIA experiment with LSD. As part of this experiment, Olson unwittingly received approximately 70 micrograms of LSD in a glass of Cointreau he drank on November 19, 1953. The drug had been placed in the bottle by a CIA officer, Dr. Robert Lashbrook, as part of an experiment he and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb performed at a meeting of Army and CIA scientists. Shortly after this experiment, Olson exhibited symptoms of paranoia and schizophrenia. Accompanied by Dr. Lashbrook, Olson sought psychiatric assistance in New York City from a physician, Dr. Harold Abramson, whose research on LSD had been funded indirectly by the CIA. While in New York for treatment, Olson fell to his death from a 10th-story window in the Statler Hotel. End of page 394, beginning of page 395. Subsection A. Background. Olson, an expert in aerobiology who was assigned to the Special Operations Division, SOD, of the U.S. Army Biological Center at Camp Detrick, Maryland. This division had three primary functions. 1. Assessing the vulnerability of American installations to biological attack. 2. Developing techniques for offensive use of biological weapons. And 3. Biological research for the CIA. Footnote 27. Pausing the reading to read footnote 27. Staff summary of Vincent Rouet interview, August 13, 75, page 3. Resuming the reading. Professionally, Olson was well respected by his colleagues in both the Army and the CIA. Colonel Vincent Rouet, Olson's immediate superior at the time of his death, was in almost daily contact with Olson. According to Colonel Rouet, quote, as a professional man, his ability was outstanding. End quote. Footnote 28. Colonel Rouet stated that, quote, during the period prior to the experiment, I noticed nothing which would lead me to believe that he was of unsound mind. End quote. Footnote 29. Dr. Lashbrook, who had monthly contacts with Olson from early 1952 until the time of his death, stated publicly that before Olson received LSD, quote, as far as I know, he was perfectly normal. End quote. Footnote 30. This assessment is in direct contradiction to certain statements evaluating Olson's emotional stability made in CIA internal. Memoranda written after Olson's death. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 28. Memorandum of COL. Vincent Rouet, to whom it may concern, no date, page 2. Footnote 29. Rouet Memorandum, page 3. Footnote 30. Joseph B. Treaster, New York Times, July 19, 75, page 1. Resuming the reading. Subsection B. The experiment. On November 18, 1953, a group of 10 scientists from the CIA and Camp Detrick attended a semi-annual review and analysis conference at a cabin located at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. 3 of the participants were from the CIA's Technical Services staff. The Detrick representatives were all from the Special Operations Division. According to one CIA official, the Special Operations Division participants, quote, agreed that an unwitting experiment would be desirable. End quote. Footnote 31. This account directly contradicts Vincent Rouet's recollection. Rouet recalls no such discussion, and has asserted that he would remember any such discussion because the SOD participants would have strenuously objected to testing on unwitting subjects. Footnote 32. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 31. Memorandum for the record from Lyman Kirkpatrick, December 1, 53, page 1. Footnote 32. Rouet Staff Summary, August 13, 75, page 6. Resuming the reading. In May, 1953, Richard Helms, Assistant DDP, held a staff meeting which the Chief of Technical Services Staff attended. At this meeting Helms, quote, indicated that the drug LSD was dynamite and that he should be advised at all times when it was intended to use it. End quote. Footnote 33. In addition, the then DDP, Frank Wisner, sent a memorandum to TSS stating the requirement that the DDP personally approve the use of LSD. Gottlieb went ahead with the experiment, footnote 34, securing the approval. End of page 395, beginning of page 396. Of his immediate supervisor. Neither the chief of TSS nor the DDP specifically authorized the experiment in which Dr. Olson participated. Footnote 35. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 33. Inspector General Diary, December 2nd, 53. Footnote 34. IBID. Dr. Gottlieb has testified that he does not remember either the meeting with Helms nor the Wisner memorandum. Gottlieb, October 18, 75, page 16. Footnote 35. Dr. Gottlieb testified that, quote, given the information we knew up to this time, and based on a lot of our own self-administration, we thought it was a fairly benign substance in terms of potential harm. End quote. This is in conflict not only with Mr. Helm's statement but also with material which had been supplied to the technical services staff. In one long memorandum on current research with LSD which was supplied to TSD, Henry Beecher described the dangers involved with such research in a prophetic manner. Quote, "The second reason to doubt Professor Rothland came when I raised the question as to any accidents which had arisen from the use of LSD-25. He said in a very positive way, quote, 'None,' end quote. As it turned out, this answer could be called overly positive, for later on in the evening I was discussing the matter with Dr. W. A. Stahl, Jr., a psychiatrist in Blue Loris Clinic in Zurich, where I had gone at Rothland's insistence. Stahl, when asked the same question, replied, quote, 'Yes,' end quote, and added spontaneously, quote, 'There is a case Professor Rothland knows about. In Geneva, a woman physician who had been subject to depression to some extent took LSD-25 in an experiment and became severely and suddenly depressed and committed suicide 3 weeks later. While the connection is not definite, common knowledge of this could hardly have allowed the positive statement Rothland permitted himself. This case is a warning to us to avoid engaging subjects who are depressed, or who have been subject to depression.' End quote. Dr. Gottlieb testified that he had no recollection of either the report or that particular section of it. Sidney Gottlieb testimony, October 19, 75, page 78. Resuming the reading. According to Gottlieb, footnote 36, a, quote, 'very small dose,' end quote, of LSD was placed in a bottle of Cointreau which was served after dinner on Thursday, November 19. The drug was placed in the liquor by Robert Lashbrook. All but 2 of the SOD participants received LSD. 1 did not drink. The other had a heart condition. Footnote 37. About 20 minutes after they finished their Cointreau, Gottlieb informed the other participants that they had received LSD. Dr. Gottlieb stated that, quote, 'up to the time of the experiment,' end quote, he observed nothing unusual in Olson's behavior. Footnote 37a. Once the experiment was underway, Gottlieb recalled that, quote, 'the drug had a definite effect on the group to the point that they were boisterous and laughing and they could not continue the meeting or engage in sensible conversation.' End quote. The meeting continued until about 1 a.m., when the participants retired for the evening. Gottlieb recalled that Olson, among others, complained of, quote, 'wakefulness,' end quote, during the night. Footnote 38. According to Gottlieb, on Friday morning, aside from some evidence of fatigue, I observed nothing unusual in Olson's actions, conversation, or general behavior. Footnote 39. Rouet recalls that Olson, quote, 'appeared to be agitated,' end quote, at breakfast, but that he, quote, 'did not consider this to be abnormal under the circumstances.' End quote. Footnote 40. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 37. Lashbrook, Staff Summary, July 19, 75, p. 3. 1 of footnote 37a. Gottlieb Memorandum, December 7, 53. Page 2. Footnote 38. Edwards Memorandum, November 28, 53, page 3. Footnote 39. Gottlieb Memorandum, December 7, 53, page 3. Footnote 40. Rouet Memorandum, page 3. Resuming the reading. Subsection C. The treatment. The following Monday, November 23, Olson was waiting for Rouet when he came into work at 7:30 a.m. For the next 2 days, Olson's friends and family attempted to reassure him and help him snap out of what appeared to be a serious depression. On Tuesday, Olson again came to Rouet and, after an hour-long conversation, end of page 396, beginning of page 397, it was decided that medical assistance for Dr. Olson was desirable. Footnote 41. Pausing the reading to read footnote 41. IBID, page 4. Resuming the reading. Ruette then called Lashbrook and informed him that Dr. Olson was in serious trouble and needed immediate professional attention. Footnote 42. Lashbrook agreed to make appropriate arrangements and told Ruette to bring Olson to Washington, D.C. Ruette and Olson proceeded to Washington to meet with Lashbrook, and the three left for New York at about 2:30 p.m. to meet with Dr. Harold Abramson. At that time Dr. Abramson was an allergist and immunologist practicing medicine in New York City. He held no degree in psychiatry, but was associated with research projects supported indirectly by the CIA. Gottlieb and Dr. Lashbrook both followed his work closely in the early 1950s. Footnote 43. Since Olson needed medical help, they turned to Dr. Abramson as the doctor closest to Washington who was experienced with LSD and cleared by the CIA. Ruette, Lashbrook, and Olson remained in New York for 2 days of consultations with Abramson. On Thursday, November 26, 1953, the three flew back to Washington so that Olson could spend Thanksgiving with his family. En route from the airport, Olson told Ruette that he was afraid to face his family. After a lengthy discussion, it was decided that Olson and Lashbrook would return to New York, that Ruette would go to Frederick to explain these events to MRS. Olson. Footnote 44. Lashbrook and Olson flew back to New York the same day, again for consultations with Abramson. They spent Thursday night in a Long Island hotel and the next morning returned to the city with Abramson. In further discussions with Abramson, it was agreed that Olson should be placed under regular psychiatric care at an institution closer to his home. Footnote 45. Subsection D. The death. Because they could not obtain air transportation for a return trip on Friday night, Lashbrook and Olson made reservations for Saturday morning and checked into the Statler Hotel. Between the time they checked in and 10 p.m., they watched television, visited the cocktail lounge, where each had 2 martinis, and dinner. According to Ashbrook, Olson was cheerful and appeared to enjoy the entertainment. End quote. He, quote, appeared no longer particularly depressed, and almost the Dr. Olson I knew prior to the experiment. End quote. Footnote 46. After dinner, Lashbrook and Olson watched television for about an hour, and at 11 o'clock, Olson suggested that they go to bed, saying that, quote, he felt more relaxed and contented than he had since, in brackets, they, end brackets, came to New York. End quote. Footnote 47. Olson then left a call with the hotel operator to wake them in the morning. At approximately 2:30 a.m. Saturday, November 28, Lashbrook was awakened by a loud, quote, crash of glass, end quote. In his report on the incident, he stated only that Olson, quote, had crashed through the closed window blind and the closed window and he fell to his death from the window of our room on the 10th floor. End quote. Footnote 48. Pausing to read the footnotes. Footnote 42. Lashbrook Memorandum, December 7, 53, page 1. Footnote 43. Staff Summary of Dr. Harold Abramson Interview, July 29, 75, page 2. Footnote 44. Lashbrook Memorandum, December 7, 53, page 3. Footnote 45. Abramson Memorandum, December 4, 53. Footnote 46. Lashbrook Memorandum, December 7, 53, page 3. Footnote 47. IBID, page 4. Footnote 48. IBID, End of page 397, beginning of page 398. Immediately after finding that Olsen had left to his death, Lashbrook telephoned Gottlieb at his home and informed him of the incident. Footnote 49. Gottlieb called Ruet and informed him of Olsen's death at approximately 2:45 a.m. Footnote 50. Lashbrook then called the hotel desk and reported the incident to the operator there. Lashbrook called Abramson and informed him of the occurrence. Abramson told Lashbrook he, quote, wanted to be kept out of the thing completely, end quote, but later changed his mind and agreed to assist Lashbrook. Footnote 51. Shortly thereafter, uniformed police officers and some hotel employees came to Lashbrook's room. Lashbrook told the police he didn't know why Olsen had committed suicide, but he did key out that Olsen, quote, suffered from ulcers. End quote. Footnote 52. Subsection E. The aftermath. Following Dr. Olsen's death, the CIA made a substantial effort to ensure that his family received death benefits, but did not notify the Olsens of the circumstances surrounding his demise. The agency also made considerable efforts to prevent the death being connected with the CIA, and supplied complete cover for Lashbrook so that his association with the CIA would remain a secret. After Dr. Olsen's death, the CIA conducted an internal investigation of the incident. As part of his responsibilities in this investigation, the General Counsel wrote the Inspector General, stating, I'm not happy with what seems to be a very casual attitude on the part of TSS representatives to the way this experiment was conducted and the remarks that this is just one of the risks running with scientific experimentation. I do not eliminate the need for taking risks, but I do believe, especially when human health or life is at stake, that at least the prudent, reasonable measures which can be taken to minimize the risk must be taken, and failure to do so was culpable negligence. The actions of the various individuals concerned after effects of the experiment on Dr. Olsen became manifest also revealed the failure to observe normal and reasonable precautions. Footnote 53. As a result of the investigation, DCI Alan Dulles sent a personal letter to the Chief of Technical Operations of the Technical Services staff who had approved the experiment, criticizing him for, quote, poor judgment in authorizing the use of this drug on such an unwitting basis and without proximate medical safeguards. End quote. Footnote 54. Dulles also sent a letter to Dr. Gottlieb, Chief of the Chemical Division of the Technical Services staff, criticizing him for recommending the, quote, unwitting application of the drug, end quote, in that the proposal, quote, did not give sufficient emphasis for medical collaboration and for the proper consideration of the rights of the individual to whom it was being administered. End quote. Footnote 55. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 49. CIA Field Office Report, December 3, 53, page 3. Footnote 50. Ruet Memorandum, page 11. Footnote 51. CIA Field Office Report, December 3, 53, page 3. Footnote 52. IBID. Footnote 53. Memorandum from the General Counsel to the Inspector General, January 4, 54. Footnote 54. Memorandum from DCI to Chief, Technical Operations, TSS, -2/12/54. Footnote 55. Memorandum from DCI to Sidney Gottlieb, February 12, 54. End of page 398. Beginning of page 399. The letters were hand-carried to the individuals to be read and returned. Although the letters were critical, a note from the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence to M.R. Helms instructed him to inform the individuals that, quote, these are not reprimands and no personnel file notation are being made. End quote. Footnote 56. Thus, Although the Rockefeller Commission has characterized them as such, these notes were explicitly not reprimands. Nor did participation in the events which led to Dr. Olson's death have any apparent effect on the advancement within the CIA of the individuals involved. Subsection 3. The surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting non-volunteer human subjects by the CIA after the death of Dr. Olson. The death of Dr. Olson could be viewed, as some argued at the time, as a tragic accident, one of the risks inherent in the testing of new substances. It might be argued that LSD was thought to be benign. After the death of Dr. Olson, the dangers of the surreptitious administration of LSD were clear, yet the CIA continued or initiated, footnote 57, a project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD to non-volunteer human subjects. This program exposed numerous individuals in the United States to the risk of death or serious injury without their informed consent, without medical supervision, and without necessary follow-up to determine any long-term effects. Prior to the Olson experiment, the Director of Central Intelligence had approved Ultra, a research program designed to develop a, quote, capability in the covered use of biological and chemical agent materials, end quote. In the proposal describing Ultra Mr. Helms, then ADDP, wrote the director that, "We intend to investigate the development of a chemical material which causes a reversible non-toxic aberrant mental state, the specific nature of which can be reasonably well predicted for each individual. This material could potentially aid in discrediting individuals, eliciting information, and implanting suggestions and other forms of mental control." Footnote 58. On February 12, 1954, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency wrote TSS officials criticizing them for, quote, poor judgment, end quote, in administering LSD on, quote, an unwitting basis and without proximate medical safeguards, end quote, to Dr. Olson, and for the lack of, quote, proper consideration of the rights of the individual to whom it was being administered, end quote. Footnote 59. On the same day, the Inspector General reviewed a report on Subproject Number 3 of MK Ultra, in which the same TSS officers who had just received letters from the director were quoted as stating that one of the purposes of Subproject Number 3 was to, end of page 399, beginning page 400, quote, observe the behavior of unwitting persons being questioned after having been given a drug, end quote. Footnote 60. There is no evidence that Subproject Number 3 was terminated even though these officers were unequivocally aware of the dangers of the surreptitious administration of LSD and the necessity of obtaining informed consent and providing medical safeguards. Subproject Number 3, in fact, used methods which showed even less concern than did the Olson experiment for the safety and security of the participants. Yet the evidence indicates the project continued until 1963. Footnote 61. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 56. Note from DDCI to Richard Helms, February 13, 54. Footnote 57. The 1963 IG report, which described the project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD, placed the project beginning in 1955. Other CIA documents reveal that it was in existence as early as February 1954. The CIA has told the committee that the project began in 1953 and that the experiment which led to Dr. Olson's death was part of the project. Footnote 58. Memorandum from ADDP items to DCI Dulles, April 3, 53, tab A, page 2. Footnote 59. Memorandum from DCI to Sidney Gottlieb, February 12, 54. And Memorandum from DCI to Chief of Operations, TSS, February 12, 54. Footnote 60. Memorandum to Inspector General from Chief, Inspection and Review, on Subproject Number 3 of GOVERNMENTAL, February 10, 54. Footnote 61. IG Report on GOVERNMENTAL, 1963. Resuming the reading. In the project, the individual conducting the test might make initial contact with a prospective subject selected at random in a bar. He would then invite the person to a safe house where the test drug was administered to the subject through drink or in food. CIA personnel might debrief the individual conducting the test, or observe the test by using a one-way mirror and tape recorder in an adjoining room. Prior consent was obviously not obtained from any of the subjects. There was also, obviously, no medical pre-screening. In addition, the tests were conducted by individuals who were not qualified scientific observers. There were no medical personnel on hand either to administer the drugs or to observe their effects, and no follow-up was conducted on the test subjects. As the Inspector General noted in 1963, a significant limitation on the effectiveness of such testing is the infeasibility of performing scientific observation of results. The, in brackets, individuals conducting the test, end brackets, are not qualified scientific observers. Their subjects are seldom accessible beyond the first hours of the test. The testing may be useful in perfecting delivery techniques, and in identifying surface characteristics of onset, reaction, attribution, and side effect. Footnote 62. This was particularly troublesome as in a number of instances, the test subject has become ill for hours or days, including hospitalization in at least one case, and the agent could only follow up by guarded inquiry after the test subject's return to normal life. Possible sickness and attendant economic loss are inherent contingent effects of the testing. Footnote 63. Paradoxically, greater care seems to have been taken for the safety of foreign nationals against whom LSD was used abroad. In several cases medical examinations were performed prior to the use of LSD. Footnote 64. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 62. IBID. Page 12. Footnote 63. IBID. According to the IG survey in 1963, physicians associated with GOVERNMENTAL could be made available in an emergency. Footnote 64. The Technical Services Division, which was responsible for the operational use of LSD abroad, took the position that, quote, no physical examination of the subject is required prior to administration of LSD by TSS-trained personnel. A position. Continuing reading footnote 63 on page 401. Need not be present. There is no danger medically in the use of this material as handled by TSS-trained personnel. End quote. The Office of Medical Services had taken the position that LSD was, quote, medically dangerous. End quote. Both the Office of Security and the Office of Medical Services argued that LSD, quote, should not be administered unless preceded by a medical examination, and should be administered only by or in the presence of a physician who had studied it and its effect. End quote. Memorandum from James Angleton, Chief, Counterintelligence Staff to Chief of Operations, December 12, 57, pages 1 to 2. End of page 400, beginning of page 401. Moreover, the administration abroad was marked by constant observation made possible because the material was being used against prisoners of foreign intelligence or security organizations. Finally, during certain of the LSD interrogations abroad, local physicians were on call, though these physicians had had no experience with LSD and would not be told that hallucinogens had been administered. Footnote 65. The CIA's project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting human subjects in the United States was finally halted in 1963, as a result of its discovery during the course of an Inspector General survey of the Technical Services Division. When the Inspector General learned of the project, he spoke to the Deputy Director for Plans, who agreed that the Director should be briefed. The DDP made it clear that the DCI and his deputy were generally familiar with Gultra. He indicated, however, that he was not sure it was necessary to brief the DDCI at that point. On May 24, 1963, the DDP advised the Inspector General that he had briefed the Director on the Gultra program and in particular had covered the question of the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting human subjects. According to the Inspector General, the DDP said that, quote, the Director indicated no disagreement and therefore the, quote, testing, end quote, will continue. End quote. Footnote 66. One copy of an, quote, eyes only, end quote, draft report on Gultra was prepared by the Inspector General who recommended the termination of the surreptitious administration project. The project was suspended following the Inspector General's report. On December 17, 1963, Deputy Director for Plans Helms wrote a memo to the DDCI, who with the Inspector General and the Executive Director Controller had opposed the covered testing. He noted two aspects of the problem. One, quote, for over a decade the clandestine services has had the mission of maintaining a capability for influencing human behavior. End quote. And, two, quote, testing arrangements in furtherance of this mission should be as operationally realistic and yet as controllable as possible. End quote. Helms argued that the individuals must be, quote, unwitting, end quote, as this was, quote, the only realistic method of maintaining the capability, considering the intended operational use of materials to influence human behavior as the operational targets will certainly be unwitting. Should the subjects of the testing not be unwitting, the program would only be, quote, pro forma, end quote, resulting in a, quote, false sense of accomplishment and readiness. End quote. Footnote 67. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 65. Physicians might be called with the hope that they would make a diagnosis of mental breakdown which would be useful in discrediting the individual who was the subject of the CIA interest. Footnote 66. Memorandum for the record prepared by the Inspector General, May 15, 63, page 1. Footnote 67. IBID, page 2. Helms continued. End of page 401, beginning of page 402. If one grants the validity of the mission of maintaining this unusual capability and the necessity for unwitting testing, there is only then the question of how best to do it. Obviously, the testing should be conducted in such a manner as to permit the opportunity to observe the results of the administration on the target. It also goes without saying that whatever testing arrangement we adopt must afford maximum safeguards for the protection of the agency's role in this activity, as well as minimizing the possibility of physical or emotional damage to the individual tested. Footnote 68. In another memo to the Director of Central Intelligence in June, 1964, Helms again raised the issue of unwitting testing. At that time General Carter, then acting DCI, approved several changes in the Gultra program proposed by Mr. Helms as a result of negotiations between the Inspector General and the DDP. In a handwritten note, however, Director Carter added that, quote, unwitting testing will be subject to a separate decision. End quote. Footnote 69. No specific decision was made then or soon after. The testing had been halted and, according to Walter Elder, Executive Assistant to DCI McCone, the DCI was not inclined to take the positive step of authorizing a resumption of the testing. At least through the summer, the DDP did not press the issue. On November 9, 1964, the DDP raised the issue again in a memo to the DCI, calling the director's attention to what he described as, quote, several other indications during the past year of an apparent Soviet aggressiveness in the field of covertly administered chemicals which are, to say the least, inexplicable and disturbing. End quote. Footnote 70. Helms noted that because of the suspension of covered testing, the agency's, quote, positive operational capability to use drugs is diminishing, owing to a lack of realistic testing. With increasing knowledge of the state of the art, we are less capable of staying up with Soviet advances in this field. This in turn results in a waning capability on our part to restrain others in the intelligence community, such as the Department of Defense, from pursuing operations in this area. End quote. Footnote 71. Helms attributed the cessation of the unwitting testing to the high risk of embarrassment to the agency as well as the, quote, moral problem. End quote. He noted that no better covered situation had been devised than that which had been used, and that, quote, we have no answer to the moral issue. End quote. Footnote 72. Helms asked for either resumption of the testing project or its definitive cancellation. He argued that the status quo of a research and development program without a realistic testing program was causing the agency to live, quote, with the illusion of a capability which is becoming minimal and furthermore is expensive. End quote. Footnote 73. Once again, no formal action was taken in response to the Helms request. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 68. Memorandum from DDP Helms to DDCI Carter, December 17, 63. Footnote 69. Memorandum from DDP Helms to DCI, June 9, 64, page 3. Footnote 70. Ibid, November 9, 64, page 1. Footnote 71. Ibid, pages 1 to 2. Footnote 72. Ibid, page 2. Footnote 73. Ibid. End of page 402, beginning of page 403. From its beginning in the early 1950s until its termination in 1963, the program of surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting non-volunteer human subjects demonstrates a failure of the CIA's leadership to pay adequate attention to the rights of individuals and to provide the effective guidance to CIA employees. Though it was known that the testing was dangerous, the lives of subjects were placed in jeopardy and their rights were ignored during the 10 years of testing which followed Dr. Olson's death. Although it was clear that the laws of the United States were being violated, the testing continued. While the individuals involved in the Olson experiment were admonished by the director, at the same time they were also told that they were not being reprimanded and that their, quote, bad judgment, end quote, would not be made part of their personnel records. When the covered testing project was terminated in 1963, none of the individuals involved were subject to any disciplinary action. Subsection 4. Monitoring and control of the testing and use of chemical and biological agents by the CIA. The Select Committee found numerous failures in the monitoring and control of the testing and use of chemical and biological agents within the CIA. Footnote 74. An analysis of the failures can be divided into 4 sections. A. The waiver of normal regulations or requirements. B. The problems in authorization procedures. C. The failure of internal review mechanisms such as the Office of General Counsel, the Inspector General, and the audit staff. And D. The effect of compartmentation and competition within the CIA. Pausing the reading to read footnote 74. Section 2, 9, of S. Res. 21 instructs the committee to examine the, quote, extent to which United States intelligence agencies are governed by executive orders, rules, or regulations either published or secret. End quote. Resuming the reading. Subsection A. The waiver of administrative controls. The internal controls within any agency rest on 1. Clear and coherent regulations. 2. Clear lines of authority. And 3. Clear rewards for those who conduct themselves in accord with agency regulations and understandable and immediate sanctions against those who do not. In the case of the testing and use of chemical and biological agents, normal CIA administrative controls were waived. The destruction of the documents on the largest CIA program in this area constituted a prominent example of the waiver of normal agency procedures by the director. These documents were destroyed in early 1973 at the order of then DCI Richard Helms. According to Helms, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, then director of TSD, came to me and said that he was retiring and that I was retiring, and he thought it would be a good idea if these files were destroyed. And I also believe part of the reason for our thinking this was advisable was there had been relationships with outsiders in government agencies and other organizations, and that these would be sensitive in this kind of a thing, but that since the program was over and finished and done with, we thought we would just get rid of the files as. End of page 403, beginning of page 404. Well, so that anybody who assisted us in the past would not be subject to follow-up or questions, embarrassment, if you will. Footnote 75. The destruction was based on a waiver of an internal CIA regulation, CSI 70-10, which regulated the, quote, retirement of inactive records, end quote. As Thomas Karamessines, then Deputy Director of Plans, wrote in Regulation OSI 70-10, quote, retirement is not a matter of convenience or of storage but of conscious judgment in the application of the rules modified by knowledge of individual component needs. The heart of this judgment is to ensure that the complete story can be reconstructed in later years and by people who may be unfamiliar with the events. End quote. Footnote 76. The destruction of the Coulter documents made it impossible for the Select Committee to determine the full range and extent of the largest CIA research program involving chemical and biological agents. The destruction also prevented the CIA from locating and providing medical assistance to the individuals who were subjects in the program. Finally, it prevented the committee from determining the full extent of the operations which made use of materials developed in the Coulter program. Footnote 77. From the inception of MK-Ultra, normal agency procedures were waived. In 1953, M.R. Helms, then Assistant Deputy Director for Plans, proposed the establishment of Coulter. Under the proposal, 6% of the research and development budget of TSD would be expended, quote, without the establishment of formal contractual relations, end quote, because contracts would reveal government interest. Helms also voted that qualified individuals in the field, quote, are most reluctant to enter into signed agreements of any sort which connect them with this activity, since such a connection would jeopardize their professional reputations. End quote. Footnote 78. End of page 404, beginning of page 405. Pausing the reading. Returning to page 404 to read the footnotes. Footnote 73. Richard Helms' testimony, September 11, 75, page 5. Many agency documents recording confidential relationships with individuals and organizations are retained without public disclosure. Moreover, in the case of MK-Ultra, the CIA had spent millions of dollars developing both materials and delivery systems which could be used by the clandestine services. The reconstruction of the research and development program would be difficult, if not impossible, without the documents, and at least one assistant to Dr. Gottlieb protested against the document destruction on those grounds. Footnote 76. Clandestine Services Institution, CSI, 70-10. When asked by the Select Committee about the regularity of the procedure by which he authorized Dr. Got leave to destroy the MK Ultra records. Helms responded, quote, well, that's hard to say whether it would be part of the regular procedure or not, because the record destruction program is conducted according to a certain pattern. There's a regular record destruction pattern in the agency monitored by certain people and done a certain way. So that anything outside of that, I suppose, would have been unusual. In other words, there were documents being destroyed because somebody had raised this specific issue rather than because they were encompassed in the regular records destruction program. So I think the answer to your question is probably yes. End quote. Helms' testimony, September 11, 75, page 6. Footnote 77. Even prior to the destruction of documents, the MK Ultra records were far from complete. As the Inspector General noted in 1963, quote, files are notably incomplete, poorly organized, and lacking in evaluative statements that might give perspective to management policies over time. A substantial portion of the Ultra record appears to rest in the memories of the principal officers and is therefore almost certain to be lost with their departures. End quote. IG Report on MK Ultra, page 23. Returning to page 405. Footnote 78. Memorandum from ADDP Helms to DCI Dulles, April 3, 53, tab A, page 2. Resuming the reading. Other agency procedures, i.e., the forwarding of documents in support of invoices and the provision for regular audit procedures, were also to be waived. On April 13, 1953, then DCI Alan Dulles approved MK Ultra, noting that security considerations precluded handling the project through usual contractual agreements. 10 years later, investigations of MK Ultra by both the Inspector General and the audit staff noted substantial deficiencies which resulted from the waivers. Because TSD had not reserved the right to audit the books of contractors in MK Ultra, the CIA had been unable to verify the use of agency grants by a contractor. Another firm had failed to establish controls and safeguards which would assure, quote, proper accountability, end quote, in use of government funds, with the result that, quote, funds have been used for purposes not contemplated by grants or allowable under usual contract relationship. End quote. Footnote 79. The entire Ultra arrangement was condemned for having administrative lines which were unclear, overly permissive controls, and irresponsible supervision. The head of the audit branch noted that inspections and audits led us to see MK Ultra as frequently having provided a device to escape normal administrative controls for research that is not especially sensitive, as having allowed practices that produce gross administrative failures, as having permitted the establishment of special relationships with unreliable organizations on an unacceptable basis, and as having produced, on at least one occasion, a cavalier treatment of a bona fide contracting organization. While admitting that there may be a need for special mechanisms for handling sensitive projects, the chief of the audit branch wrote that, quote, both the terms of reference and the ground rules for handling such special projects should be spelled out in advance so that diversion from normal channels does not mean abandonment of controls. Special procedures may be necessary to ensure the security of highly sensitive operations. To prevent the erosion of normal internal control mechanisms, such waivers should not be extended to less sensitive operations. Moreover, only those regulations which would endanger security should be waived. To waive regulations generally would result in highly sensitive and controversial projects having looser rather than stricter administrative controls. MNAMI, the Fort Detrick CIA project for research and development of chemical and biological agents, provides another example where efforts to protect the security of agency activities overwhelmed administrative controls. No written records of the transfer of agents such as anthrax or shellfish toxin were kept, quote, because of the sensitivity of the area and the desire to keep any possible use of materials like this recordless. End quote. Footnote 81. M.K. Naomi, the Fort Detrick CIA project for research and development of chemical and biological agents, provides another example where efforts to protect the security of agency activities overwhelmed administrative controls. No written records of the transfer of agents such as anthrax or shellfish toxin were kept, quote, because of the sensitivity of the area and the desire to keep any possible use of materials like this recordless. End quote. Footnote 81. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 79. Memorandum from IG to Chief, TSD, November 8, 63, as quoted in Memorandum from Chief, Audit Branch. Footnote 80 is not on this page, but I will read it regardless. Footnote 80. The memorandum suggested that administrative exclusions, because of the importance of such decisions, should require the personal approval of the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence on an individual case basis. Present CIA policy is that only the DCI can authorize certain exemptions from regulations. Footnote 81. Sidney Gottlieb Testimony, October 18, 75, Hearings, Volume 1, page 51. Resuming the reading. The end of page 405, beginning page 406. Result was that the agency had no way of determining what materials were on hand, and could not be certain whether delivery systems such as dart guns, or deadly substances such as cobra venom had been issued to the field. Here is where the recording for Part 33